morning, everyone. My name is Lori Gagan, and I am joined today by my amazing co-host, Kathleen Halal. And today we've got some really exciting information that we're looking forward to sharing. But before we bring our guest in, I would like to read our mission statement and our disclaimers. So the Wellness Crusaders mission is to educate and empower you to make informed choices for your health, the health of your children, our communities, and our earth. We are committed to fostering a world where the balance between human health and environmental stewardship is respected and nurtured. We hope you will join us on this holistic and transformative journey as we work together to create a healthier, more harmonious world for all. And just a few disclaimers that the listener understands that the role of the health coach is not to prescribe or assess micro and macronutrient levels, to provide healthcare, medical, or nutrition therapy services, or to diagnose, treat, or cure any disease, condition, or other physical or mental ailments of the human body. Rather, the coach is a mentor and a guide who has been trained in holistic health and soil health to help clients, gardeners, and farmers have a positive, sustainable lifestyle and help with the changes. The listener also understands that we are not acting in the capacity of a doctor, a licensed dietitian, psychologist, or any other licensed or registered professionals, and that any advice given by us on our podcast is not meant to take the place of advice of these professionals. The listener is under care of a healthcare professional or currently uses prescription medications. The client should discuss any dietary changes or potential dietary supplement use with his or her doctor and should never discontinue any prescription medications without first consulting their doctor. The listener understands that the information mentioned in all of our talks should not be seen as medical or nursing advice and is not meant, again, to take the place of seeing licensed healthcare professionals. But a little bit about our guest this evening. His name is Howard Vlieger. Howard is a third-generation family farmer who has been a student of the soil, studying why and how the soil works as it does since 1989. Howard lives on a family farm where he was born and raised in northwest Iowa. He assists his son with some of the duties of their diverse family farm. Their farm direct markets beef, chicken, eggs, lamb, pork, turkey, and dairy products. Since 1992, Howard has been a crop and livestock nutrition advisor. He has founded 3 companies to help family farmers reduce their dependency on chemical-based farming and transition them to biological, regenerative, and/or organic crop production methods. He has been privileged to work with crop and livestock operations all over US and Canada. Howard also works with scientists and researchers worldwide, investigating problems caused by GMOs and the chemicals used in growing them, working to develop effective solutions based on the latest science and yet working with nature to solve the real-life problems farmers are experiencing because of the GMO crops and glyphosate-based herbicides. He is the primary coordinator and co-author of a first of its kind in the world scientific study, The Feeding of Non-GMO Corn and Soy and GMO Corn and Soy to Pigs for Their Lifetime as Meat Animals. He is an internationally recognized educator and a speaker on the topic of GMOs and soil health. He serves on the advisory board for GMO Toxin Free USA and GMO Science. He believes it is an amazing opportunity to be a caretaker of the soil. The good Lord gave us an amazing creation to be caretakers of. It is a true privilege and a responsibility to continue the never-ending learning experience of working with the biological elemental components of soil to produce a clean, nutrient-dense food for all deserving families to eat. It is even a greater privilege, Howard says, to work with family farmers to help them gain a better understanding of crop and livestock production to produce a premium quality food. But Howard's greatest accomplishment is being a Christian husband to his wonderful wife, Pamela, of 42 plus years, a father to 3 adult children, and a proud grandfather of 3 amazing grandchildren. So we're going to bring Howard in. And Howard, we are quite honored to have you as a guest on our show. I mean, I've only known you virtually, and I can't even believe right now that we're doing this talk live out there. So I'm super honored to have you as a guest. But Kathleen, you've got some questions, so I'm going to let you take it away, and I'll chime in, and I've got some questions as well. So welcome, Howard.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share some information with you and your listeners.
So, Howard, you and I have known each other for over 10 years now. It's been a long time. And you helped me to heal my kids when they had autoimmune issues. So I'm always very appreciative when you share your knowledge. And I think that the more people hear what you know, the better for them. You're helping so many people by spreading the word, and you help my family, and more families out there need help. More people need to understand what's going on in our food supply and what we should really know about what we should be feeding our families. So, and I've also gotten into community landscaping, city policies, managing parks and schools. And because after I learned from you what the typical farm chemicals are doing out there on the farms to the farm animals, and the results of using those, the negative results of using those dangerous toxins, I started working, as you know, in communities. I worked with our city mayor and our city council to get them to adopt an Organics First city policy. That was about, I guess, 9 years ago, they enacted that, and they're very happy. The city manager called me the other day and said, hey, do you have a product? Because I got involved with a non-toxic herbicide through you as well. And so there are solutions for people out there, and I think we need to share more information about why people should be concerned and what they can do about things. And so I think something that people need to learn about, Lori brought this up today, is regenerative practices. I went out and I got accredited in organic landscaping after you taught me so much about what was going on in the farms. And basically the principles are the same for your home garden, for your community park, for the crops. It's about soil science and so on. And even your email says student of the soil. So do you want to address that a little bit, like what regenerative practices mean for the environment and for farming?
Well, the term regenerative, I'm not sure who coined it. I like Gabe Brown's definition of using regenerative, or explanation of using regenerative over sustainable. And he said, why would you want to sustain a broken system? And when he says that, he means, everyone in our country is farming a degraded system, that being the soil, from what it was when it was first broken up, especially in the prairies. Organic matter is much lower today, even on the regenerative farms where there have been massive improvements in bringing that back. It's still not like it was. But the regenerative term, from my perspective on our farm, the thing it means the most to me, it keeps getting better. And I see that from year to year, depending on the situation and the circumstances. one example that I'll always remember, my son asked me for help 2 springs ago. We had put up a hot wire out in the field around the bales that we had stacked there so that the cows couldn't get at them when they were grazing. And then, of course, we had fed the bales, and so we had to roll that wire up before we put the crop in the spring. And then we had a wire up on top of the hill to roll up as well. So I'm out there doing my part of keeping tension on the wire from the end of the wire. And down where the bales were, I'm walking. And as I'm walking, I'm looking at the ground. And every footprint that I make, I can see 4 to 5 earthworm holes with every step I take. And I'm like, wow, this is, we're absolutely doing what's right.
Yeah.
And then we went up on top of the hill. He always puts a fence around our wildlife refuge. We have a 3.5 acre wildlife refuge in the middle of the section that I planted in 1993. And it's predominantly trees. And I'm holding the end of the wire with my pliers, and he's a 1/4 mile away with the tractor running the PTO to roll the wire up. And I'm walking with the wire in my hand. And as I walk, I'm pulling the steel fence posts out. And he puts them in way deeper than they need to be, but that's fine. But as I'm walking with the wire in my right hand held by the pliers, I can reach over and move that T-post 4 directions and pull it out of the ground with one hand. And it's, 10 inches in the ground. So the soil is that mellow. And every single post I pulled out, there's earthworms hanging on the bottom of the moist soil on the post. And it's just, that you don't find that in conventionally farmed fields.
Can you explain the difference between the word conventionally? People might need to understand like what the difference is, because the earthworms, like, why are the earthworms such a great sign?
Well, that's one of the easiest signs to recognize positive soil health is the presence of the earthworms. And my computer's trying to play games on me. And it won't quit. Bill Gates is watching.
We can see.
Yeah. The earthworms are the original recycling mechanism. The good Lord knew what he was doing when he created the soil. Everything in the soil is set up to function properly to be a continually recycling mechanism and regenerator of nutrition. And nitrogen, for example, people buy commercial nitrogen. They put it on their lawn. It goes on the golf course. They put it on everywhere. Well, why would you do that if you can plant a legume where you need nitrogen? And a legume is a type of crop that has the ability to pull nitrogen out of the atmosphere and fix it in the soil. 76% of our atmosphere is nitrogen. So why go buy it? Yeah. When all you need to do is put the leguminous type crops in, and it will pull the nitrogen out of the atmosphere, fix it in the soil. Then you plant the nitrogen requiring crop behind it, and free nitrogen. That's kind of a no-brainer, especially with the costs of fertilizer in this day of consolidation and monopolization that has taken place for most everything in our country, whether it's the inputs from the farmer, where he can sell it. It's all been consolidated significantly. So it's only set up for the big boys. It isn't set up for the independents.
Hey, Howard, I have a question in regards to the legumes. Are there certain legumes better than others? And would it be different in Iowa than it is Utah for the type of legumes, for gardeners and farmers listening?
Yes, it would be different. And there's an excellent resource that anybody and everybody can download. It's type this in: Managing Cover Crops Profitably. It's a publication that's been updated, and it gives the functions, or the benefits, I should say, and the side effects, if there's any, of all of the different species of cover crops. And okay, people are saying, wait a minute, what's a cover crop? Well, one of the primary concepts in regenerative farming is to have a living root in the soil as many days of the year as possible. So you always want something growing there, rather than in typical commodity production. They come in the spring, they till the soil, which is damaging to the soil. They plant the crop, put lots of synthetic products on it, and those are all detrimental to the biological diversity of the soil. The regenerative approach, you work with the soil. Everything we do in our farm is, does this hurt the soil? You know, you want as minimal disturbances as possible. Doing away with synthetic products to the fullest degree possible, and this is a step-by-step process as far as what you need to do. And for the benefit of farmers, there's several companies out there now that are assisting them in how to do this properly and successfully. Understanding Ag is the one that is at the top of the list in my mind, because I know many of the founders of the company, Gabe Brown being one of them, who I've been privileged to know Gabe since 2008. Dr. Lane Ingham asked me to go to Burleigh County, North Dakota, and explain compost tea to the folks in Burleigh County. And that's when I met Gabe. This was before I had the privilege of starting to work with Dr. Huber and Dr. Kramer and how many other amazing scientists that recognized the issues with GMOs and or glyphosate herbicide and other herbicides. And after I heard everything that Burleigh County had to say, and Jay Fuhrer was the head of the NRCS up there, Natural Resources Conservation Service, I asked him, I says, well, would you like to hear some information about GMOs? And they said, yeah. And I told them what we had seen anecdotally as far as the effects it was having on the health of the livestock. And then at the end of that presentation, I brought up glyphosate, which I knew I was stepping on toes when I did that, because everybody that was doing the cover crop approach, and this was before it was called regenerative, they were using that as a termination tool to wipe out their cover crop before they planted their cash crop. Well, I told the truth of what I had accumulated for data to that point in time, and Gabe was across the room from me, and as I was saying what I had to say, he just kind of stared at me, and I thought, yep, I made him mad. Well, then Jay Fuhrer asked me to come back up for their field days in the summer, so we went back up, and we went from field to field to field and listened what they were doing and looked at things. And I asked Jay, I says, can I go out in each field with my spade? He says, oh, knock yourself out. Do whatever you want to. Well, we're at the last field, and it's not time for Q&A, and they're having good discussion. Somebody brings up like glyphosate. Of course, I can't keep my mouth shut, so I got my hand in the air and said what I felt needed to be said. And sure enough, there's Gabe again, standing there just kind of staring at me. And I thought, yep, I did it again. Fast forward 5 years, I'm in Springfield, Illinois at the Acres USA conference, working in the Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance booth. I was still on the board of directors there at that time. Dr. Huber is one of the keynote speakers at the conference, and Gabe Brown is one of the keynote speakers at the conference. Our booth is right across from the food booth, and I literally do not have time to sit down. Every time I sit down, somebody stops and wants to ask me a question, and it's people I don't know, and I'm like, you know, what's going on here? Why am I? And I wasn't talking about Farfa. And this one gentleman comes up to me and he says, "Are you Howard Vlieger?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, I was up listening to Dr. Huber and his talk on GMOs and glyphosate, and I asked him a question. I said, what do I need to do to remediate my soil from years of use of glyphosate?" He says, "Oh, that's easy. You go down to the exhibit hall and you find Howard Vlieger in the Farm Ranch Freedom Alliance booth, and he'll answer all your questions." So I understood why I didn't have time to sit down. And the food booth is right over here next to us. So everybody comes by our booth, and Gabe comes trouncing down the aisle, and I saw him out of the corner of my eye. I was talking to two gentlemen, and he stops in front of the booth. He steps forward, sticks out his hand. He says, "Howard, boy, is it good to see you. You were sure right about glyphosate. Keep up the good work." And I could have swallowed my teeth in the tongue at the same time because I thought I had made him mad. And later I found out that was, I bonded with him for life at that point in time, because he said, my mind was an open book. He said, "I listened to exactly what you said. I went home and we stopped using it." And he said, "We saw the results immediately."
Wow.
So that was, a good thing to hear. But back to regenerative. Okay, minimal disturbance. That's from both synthetic inputs and or tillage. Having a living root, and importantly, armor on the soil. We don't ever want bare ground because it's susceptible to wind erosion. It's susceptible to water erosion. When a raindrop falls out of the sky, when it hits the ground, it's going over 100 miles an hour. So if you have armor on the soil or residue of a previous crop, then that's protecting that soil from both the wind erosion and the potential for erosion. The living root, that's the feeding the microbial population of the soil. And this is basic 5th grade elementary science. And if they're not teaching this in 5th grade, the teacher needs to be spanked. Go outside and hold the backside of your hand up against the sun. What do you feel? It's energy. Okay, the photosynthesis process is very, very simple and yet complex. That leaf of that plant takes in that energy from the sun, grabs onto the carbon from the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That forms a liquid, simple sugar in that plant with that photosynthesis process. That sugar feeds that plant, and then that plant pushes or exudes that sugar, the excesses of what it's producing, into the soil through its root system. The microorganisms are in the root zone or the rhizosphere. They get this liquid carbon. Dr. Ingham would refer to it as cake and cookies. Well, what happens when you give kids cake and cookies? They go hyper. So the microbial population grows and grows and is stimulated. So the more living roots you have there and the more photosynthesis and transfer of that liquid carbon into the soil, the better off you are. So what's it doing? It's pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. And anybody that says that carbon dioxide is all bad, I'm not going to say what I was thinking.
Probably the same thing the three of us were thinking.
It is uneducated or lying. Because without carbon dioxide, life on Earth would end instantly. It's gone. It disappears. So that whole carbon propaganda that's being put out is for nefarious reasons. But having that living root there, the soil and the gut of the mammal are very, very comparable. I've got a good friend in southern Kansas. He has a t-shirt that says, "The answer is the soil. What's your question?" And it's very appropriate because everything ultimately can be traced back to the soil. And healthy soil, healthy plants, healthy animals, healthy people. So using a diverse mixture of cover crops, maybe I should define a cover crop, a beneficial crop species that you're putting here as a mechanism on the soil to both provide cover, as in a living cover from a protective armor standpoint, and or living root. So the more diversity we have in those crop species, the more diversity of the types of foods that we have go into the soil. It's just like the diet. Okay, what do we learn in the basics of nutrition? Eat from all of the food groups. So if you only have one thing, you're only feeding this subset of microorganisms. And that's what people may or may not understand. None of the nutrition is efficiently transferred to the plant or the mammal through direct mechanisms. The microbial transfer of the nutrition is by far the most efficient. In the soil, you have three mechanisms of transfer. One is by direct contact, that if the nutrition is right next to the root, it works, or by liquid transfer, water transfers that nutrient into the plant, or the microbial transfer. And the microbial transfer is by far the most efficient. So in your gut, you eat something, you're dependent on the bacteria and the fungi and all the good guys in your stomach to break down that substance and take the nutrition, the calcium, the phosphorus, the potassium, all the nutrients, and give that to your system. So the healthier your gut is, the healthier you're going to be, because of that efficient mechanism of the transfer of the nutrient. The soil is the same way. The more microbial life we have in the soil, the more fertility we have in the soil. And this falsity of mining the soil by not putting on so many pounds of this and so many pounds of this and so many pounds of this, that concept was developed by the companies that were going to gain financially from synthetic application of nutrients. Can you have a depleted soil from a nutritional standpoint? Yes, if the practices have been wrongly implemented on that soil. But when you get the biological diversity back in the soil like it was designed to be, and you can use the full soil profile, because many people are only farming or utilizing maybe this much at best of the top surface. Well, it's how deep, and then of course it depends on the where you are in the country for how deep your topsoil is. But there's way more nutrition out there than any of the land grant universities would lead a person to believe. So, does that make sense?
It does. It makes sense. I think that in a nutshell, would it be safe to say that conventional methods use toxic chemicals that kind of stop all of that great regenerative biological activity from happening? They kind of stop the cycle, and that sometimes farmers or maybe landscapers who use toxic or conventional chemical methods maybe don't allow that life cycle to take place. And that the other thing, the other part of that is the expense for farmers. That if farmers are using regenerative methods, they tend to have healthier soil, healthier farms. The soil holds water better, they use less water, they have lower expenses on inputs, and they tend to have less disease. Could you go into that a little?
Well, in many ways, the use of the synthetic products creates the environment for a dependency, or maybe even an addiction for those products. And as we have learned more and more and more about the side effects of those various products, it's completely out of line with the good Lord's design.
Agreed.
Because the the recycling activity, and livestock is very important. Do you have to have livestock in your garden to have a good garden? Absolutely not. Or do you have to have livestock in your field to have a good crop? No, you don't, because Russell Hedrick is one person that comes to mind, that he's in the Carolinas and never farmed a day in his life, and decided to give it a go. There was no farming history, and he's first generation farmer. He went to a talk by Ray Archuleta, and he heard the concepts of regenerative agriculture using cover crops and the whole implementation of that full concept, minus the use of livestock. Russell doesn't have any livestock that I'm aware of, for the last I heard, which was late last year. But he's winning yield trials on corn and soybean yields in his part of the country. And he's not using all these synthetic products that are typical for the traditional farmer that, okay, goes uptown, well, how much fertilizer do I need? How much chemical I need? How much of this do I need? How much of that do I need? Again, that's good for the person selling the inputs, but it's not good for the soil in many cases, and some worse than others. And it's not good for the pocketbook. Understanding ag, some people will say, well, I can't plant cover crops, it's going to cost me more money. If you keep your mindset that you're going to keep doing what you're doing and then start doing this, then you would be true. But the first thing that they teach the farmers is how they can successfully reduce their overall input, not have a disaster as far as yields are concerned. And from that time over, as you further implement these concepts that are tried and proven over many, many years, Gabe started in the early 90s. I think he said 93 is when, and I sent you a link earlier today. I hope you can put that up, that when I teach soil health classes in different regions, that's part of the curriculum, that when they leave that class, they're going to leave with that book, Dirt to Soil. And it's every fifth grade class in our country should have that as standard reading. It's so down to earth. It tells how what at the time was very, very adverse conditions and weather problems. If it wasn't for bad luck, people would say Gabe wouldn't have had any luck, because he got whacked 3 years in a row. And while it was tough to survive at the time, in the end, it was the best thing that ever happened to him. And I can relate with that. I started farming and went the alternative direction a little quicker than Gabe did from a timeline, but I did it for the same reason. It was because of desperation. Now, I didn't have a great plan or design or a vision. It was, I'm desperate. I got to do something to survive, because I just had the luck of starting to farm in the worst year you could have started in the last 100 years. And so anybody that says it's going to cost me more, no, that's not true. The biggest factor that's important in being successful is listening to someone like Understanding Ag, and they will give you the tools to do proper implementation. And bing, 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 bing. Do we do soil testing? Yeah, they do soil testing. They do a lot of things that make perfect sense, and then help the farmer understand how to properly interpret the results of what they're seeing. The only thing that it will require more effort maybe for the farmer is he's going to have to use that space between his ears a little more than he might be used to. Because if he's going uptown and listening to the guy that's selling this and selling that and selling the other thing, well, and we'll come out and we'll scout your fields and we'll tell you everything you need to do.
Yeah.
Who's paying for that? So
I will say that your recommendation of Gabe Brown's book, From Dirt to Soil, is such an outstanding recommendation, not just for farmers, also for consumers. Like, everybody should read it so they understand the principles. And it also gives you an inside view to how hard it is to farm and how much you guys put on the line every single year. When you plant crops or raise animals, it's all risk. It's all risk. In my mind, it's probably the hardest profession out there, farming. And I think everyone should read that book in order to understand what it takes. And then there's a movie as well that, about, called Common Ground. Well, there are two movies. It's part of a trilogy. The first movie is called Kiss the Ground, and that's streaming now on Netflix, so you could see that movie. And that movie actually features Gabe Brown, and he goes into those struggles, and then everything you're talking about in terms of regenerative practices. And the second movie is called Common Ground, which is kind of going around to smaller theaters now, and you can go to the website commongroundmovie.com, I think, and you can see what that schedule looks like. And that movie will eventually also be streaming on a major network, so people can learn about these things you're talking about and what it's like to live through these struggles. And I, for one, am so grateful for farmers like you, Howard, who are figuring out better ways to farm. It's just a win-win-win. You spend less money on the inputs, you have healthier soil, healthier animals, people who consume your food are healthier, and the food is delicious. Can you talk a little bit about the nutrient density and what happens?
And you know what, can I just add to what Kathleen just said when you're going through your explanation? Do you think that the lack of nutrient dense foods, I know I've done workshops with Dr. Huber, and we always talk about depleted tryptophan. So, and then we see this uptick right now in the younger generation of, ADD, ADHD, anxiety. And we know that, these kids are probably depleted of these amino acids that you can either A, only get from food, or B, by supplements. So when you're explaining what Kathleen just asked, could you maybe throw in a few things for some of the parents who, one, aren't gardeners or farmers, but they're listening because they're really just starting to get into this?
Maybe talk about the pigs.
Yes.
I'll start with the nutrient density. The lack of nutrient density, and it's simple once you understand it. Okay, I'll do my best to give you an elementary understanding. We eat food because we need nutrition. We need protein, we need calcium, we need phosphorus, we need potassium, we need macro and micro and phytonutrients. Phyto is something that people know very little about, and I'll circle back to that a little later. But traditional farming practices and synthetic fertilizer is focused on bulk production. The farmers don't get paid when they sell a commodity. They don't get paid for quality. They get docked if it's lacking, and the example would be poor test weight on corn. You could receive a dock if you had poor test weight, but the nutrient density is greatly ignored. Dr. William Albrecht was one of the pioneers in soil science and subsequently soil health. He was at the University of Missouri, and he had the SPAM concept: soil, plants, animal, man. And if he was the one that the healthy soil, healthy plant, healthy animal, healthy people came from, I'm not sure. But in mainstream production commodity agriculture, they get paid for bulk. They'll put on a lot of nitrogen and they'll put on a lot of potassium. Well, when you do that, you're actually growing a crop that is susceptible to attack by insect and or disease. because when you short yourself on phosphorus and calcium, you're going to have problems. When people eat food, they eat for the nutrients that they need in their body. If the food is lacking in nutrient density, they are consuming bulk hollow calories, but they are consuming calories. So they eat the calories, they don't get the nutrients from that food that they need to satisfy their body, so they eat more. Well, those bulk hollow calories are a significant contributor to the obesity levels in our country. They're not the only factor. There's many other things that come into play, but that's very, very critical. The reason it's so critical, if you don't have the nutrient density that your body requires, your immune system is going to be weakened. And if you have a compromised immune system and you're not getting nutrient density in your food, if there's a contaminant can be chlorinated water, fluorinated water, some sort of pesticide residue in the water, some sort of pesticide residue in the food. Whenever that toxin enters your digestive system, 70 to 80% of the cells of your immune system are in your gut. That's your first line of defense. Well, if that's not healthy, then that toxin is more likely to cause a problem to adversely affect your health. So without that maximum nutrient density, you cannot have, the good Lord gave us that defense mechanism of the immune system to deal with something that come along that might not be good for us. Of course, just didn't happen before the fruit come off the tree, but that's a whole nother story. And the lack of nutrient density is the single biggest problem to poor health and disease in our country.
Agreed.
And the when you take a bite of a piece of fruit and it tastes really good and it's juicy, you don't have to tell yourself that that's got nutrient density. Your taste buds can tell you that. I think back to the first natural meat we sold. We were selling natural meat before there was such a thing as natural meat. A gentleman who worked at the local fertilizer dealer, he and his wife were experiencing a few health issues, and he come down one day and he says, I think I want to try some of your hamburger. I said, we don't have hamburger, but we have lean ground beef. Well, what's the difference? I says, the hamburgers are stuff you get uptown. Well, I'd like to try some. What's it cost? So I told him. Oh, he went on and on and on about the price. And I said, hey, nobody's got a gun to your head. You don't have to buy it. A little while later, he comes back. He buys twice as much as he did the first time. And of course, he complained about the price being a good Hollander, and I can pick on the Hollanders because I'm half Dutch. And not long, he comes back and he wants twice as much as what he got the second time. And I said, what's going on here? He says, I got to kind of fess up. I says, why? He said, well, Marlene, that's his wife's name. She told me 3 times we're out of Howard's ground beef. And I wasn't paying attention. So I come home for supper last night, stepped in the kitchen from the garage. And the first thing I said, what's that smell? She turned around and gave me one of those looks. And he said, I knew I was in trouble. She said, I told you 3 times that we were out of Howard's ground beef and you didn't get any more. So I stopped at the grocery store. I'm making hamburgers and you're going to eat them.
I love it.
Then he says, well, I got to tell you the truth. He says, I can't hardly put enough ketchup on it to get it down. And he said, I only need one of your burgers. I ate 2 of the stuff from the store and I'm still not satisfied. And I usually have a little bit of an off stomach after I eat it. And I looked at him and I said, sounds like it's pretty high priced meat to me. and I just couldn't let that go by. But we've had comments from, people that can't eat eggs because they're allergic to eggs. Well, they can eat the eggs that we raise on our farm. So are they allergic to eggs or dairy? The dairy is the big one. How many people are allergic to dairy or supposedly allergic to dairy? Are they allergic to the eggs and the dairy or how it's being produced and how it's being processed after it's produced? So if you don't feed the animal right, don't expect to get the good stuff.
That's right. And there's a big difference in the flavor too. That's the truth. I can attest.
You don't have to tell anybody that because and best thing they can do is run out. Be on it for 3 weeks and then run out. Oh, wait a minute. We can't do this.
Yeah. There was
but it's just, I get very complimentary remarks from people. And I said, there's nothing special about our meat. It's just the way meat's supposed to taste. And it's regrettable that so few people truly understand what meat is really supposed to taste like.
Yeah.
Howard, sorry.
Oh, it's okay, Lori.
Oh, Howard, you grew up in that farm, your third family. So did you always eat this type of meat and eggs and dairy and chicken and?
To a great extent. My folks moved on this place in 1959. They bought it a year or 2 years later. I can't remember which it was. They bought the farm from Bill and Margaret McDonald. So I literally live on old McDonald's farm. And my dad used some pesticides, but he did a lot of tillage for managing weed control. And, when I learned that aspect of working with the soil, that was a change that we had to make, but it was very, very positive, and I fully understand it today. But what we have in what we produce now is better tasting than what we had when I was a kid, but there was nothing as bad then as it is today because of the commoditization of the production practices. Commodity production is focused to be the least cost producer. They're going to do everything they can to put the pounds on and get it to market as cheap as they can. Our focus on our farm is soil health first. Nutrient density and cleanliness are second. They're side by side. And when I had my aha moment, it was in the early 90s. My wife works at the college. She would give a package of meat to a fellow employee that it did her a favor. And, well, boy, this is really good. Do you sell this? Well, we weren't at that time, but then that's how we got started. Well, then we went to her brother in Ohio, and we took meat out with us. When we went there, we spent a few days there, and we were having burgers on the grill for supper that one night. And I took a bite of the burger, and I'm like,
Ugh.
And I was looking for my wife, and finally I found it. I said, what did you do to this? Well, I bought ground chuck. I thought it was, I said, you what? Well, I wasn't going to use everything we brought for Terry to eat. Well, I said, this come from the grocery store? How do you eat this stuff? So that was kind of a wake up. And then one of my really good friends and supporters over the year was Colonel John Phillips. And he was the most widely known market reporter in the 4-state area in the Midwest, 5-state area. And once I started working with him, I gave him meat. That's the way it's supposed to taste. That's the way it's supposed to taste. And we hear that comment from, well, I ain't had meat like this and since I ate at my grandpa's place
Yeah.
a number of years ago.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
I love
Yeah.
that.
You know, so much now is about, I mean, for me, being on the consumer side, Howard, so much is about what kind of food am I going to feed my family? And so many people don't even know they should be asking that question. And I was online. I started to say earlier, I was online today and there was a conversation and some guy's on there and he's like, well, you know, farmers have to use these chemicals or they can't feed the world. Literally. And then it gave the other adage, the dose makes the poison. So don't worry about it if there's just a little bit of Roundup in your food. Of course, you can imagine I responded to him, but I think that not everyone is aware of this difference between the kind of food, like a hamburger is not a hamburger, and the smell and the taste and the nutrients in it, it's not the same thing. And I just would like to encourage everyone that once you hear podcasts like ours, or you learn that there are different kinds of food that you can buy, I hope that everyone will support farmers like you, Howard, that will support farmers who are using regenerative practices to make healthier food. And the second part of that is please don't forget to tell the pig story.
I'll get to that. I want to, you triggered an idea.
Mhm.
You know, the microbial population in the soil is the recycling mechanism. You know, people say, well, if chemicals were used, how do you deal with it? It's called bioremediation.
Mhm.
The biological organisms in the soil consume both nutrients and synthetic compounds. You have to have the right organisms to deal with some of the synthetics. But as you step away from the use, reduce and or eliminate the use of those synthetics, then that biological diversity keeps getting better and better and better. So you're cleaning the soil at the same time you're making more nutrition available from the soil. So that's something that people need to recognize as a mechanism of why it keeps getting better from the regenerative definition of regenerative practices. Your comment about the pigs, my work as a crop and livestock nutrition advisor starting in 1992, I had the amazing privilege of having one of the biggest research fields you could ever step into. Backing up to the early 80s when I was working 4 and 5 jobs to survive while farming because of finances, that was one of the best things that happened to me. Because one of the jobs I had was working for a veterinary. His name was Doc Newman. I worked for him for 8 years, and he graduated from vet school before penicillin was on the market. And he said, when I graduated from vet school, there were 2 things to veterinary medicine: environment and nutrition. If he'd get a call the pigs are sick, he'd go and look, and the first thing he did is look and see where they're sleeping. If they had a wet, musty, ammonia smelling place to sleep, or if it was dry and dusty, well, clean the pen, give them clean, dry quarters, and they'll be better. Or, well, doc, my pigs ain't growing fast enough. Well, you need some more protein in the diet. And back in those days, it was animal protein. So everybody had draft horses. And if one died, you skinned it because the hide was worth money, and you drug the carcass in the yard. And the pigs ate it. That was animal protein was the source that was used. Or doc, my pigs are scouring. Well, they're getting too much protein. Put a little oats in the diet. But that concept of environment nutrition, that stuck with me more so as years progressed than what I realized at the time. Environment nutrition, biological, and elemental. Put all four of those together to achieve true health, whether it's in the soil, whether it's for the plants, whether it's for the animals, whether it's for the people. When our first daughter was born, my wife took her in for her first checkup. And Dr. Willikus was our doctor. He was from Holland. He had a good Dutch accent. And he said, "You spend your money on good food or you're going to give it to me." And he was right. You know, the people that buy groceries for what's on sale, I just, okay, I get it, but I don't get it. And by the same token, I do get it. Our education system has been hijacked so severely. Doc Newman's a prime example. Environment nutrition was what he was taught in vet school. Well, Doc Newman was 95 when he died last year, and he was still sharp as a tack.
Wow.
Another veterinary friend I have is 73. His name is Dr. Dunham. He wasn't taught environment and nutrition in vet school. He was taught vaccines and drugs, drugs and vaccines, vaccines and drugs, drugs and vaccines.
Oh my goodness.
Well, the same forces that hijacked the education system in the land grant universities, focusing on synthetic inputs for crop production, and subsequently, synthetic needs now for animal production. It went all the way up the chain. Well, the synthetics, they also kicked out of the medical school the same time that they hijacked the land grant university system. They hijacked the medical school training, veterinary and human doctors. They were they taught nutrition? Ask a grad school medical graduate today, well, what's your education? Well, I got to follow the CDC's recommendation on vaccines, and if you don't feel good, here's a pill.
Yeah, agreed.
That doesn't fix the underlying cause of the symptom. It's just
I don't think I ever realized, I never really thought about the veterinarians, like they changed their school and took that away from them as well.
The same.
Oh, that's
you can pay the pharmacist, or you can pay the farmer.
Yeah. So it's, again, that nutrient density is so very, very important. And we talked before we got on air about the recent study from Iowa of how we got such extremely high cancer rates. The funding of that study in particular, they're blaming it on alcohol and binge drinking. I'm not saying there couldn't be a problem with alcohol and binge drinking related to cancer, but why do they ignore the elephant in the room? There's more pesticides applied to the cropland in the state of Iowa than any other state in the country.
You know what? We should post that map. That government map where it shows Roundup or glyphosate usage in the U.S., where it's all dark red right over Iowa.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll see if I can find that. I may have that.
It's 500 pounds per square acre, or square mile, excuse me. But it's obscene. And, I testified at a Senate subcommittee hearing in Des Moines, that's our state capital, on the 12th of February, because there was legislation introduced by the Bayer lobbyist that the legislation, in essence, would make it almost impossible for a civil suit to be filed against a chemical company that has an EPA registered product. And I went down and testified, and I shared facts. Everything I said in my testimony, I could back up with references and or documentation from legal cases in our country. And no one disputed any of the facts that I had presented in my testimony.
I'm just going to say thank you, Howard. Thank you.
The chairman of the subcommittee was in a tight spot because that when they had the subcommittee in the House, there was only 4 people in the room. The lobbyist from Bayer and the Bayer employee. And then there were 2 people from a legal action council that opposed the legislation. But in the Senate subcommittee hearing, the word was out about what was going on with this legislation. So the chair of the committee, he started, of course, with the Bayer lobbyist. He literally introduced the legislation. Then the Bayer employee he told about all of the product that they produce in Iowa and how the farmers depend on it and how safe glyphosate is, and over 1,500 studies that proved how safe it was. And I wasn't about to open that can of worms because the sad reality is the guy that said it, along with most of the people there, wouldn't have had a clue how to interpret a scientific study. And anyway, I gave my testimony. After the Bayer lobbyist went first, the Bayer employee went next. Then they had all the suits from the commodity organizations and one lady. She was nicely dressed. And then they got to the dissenting opinions. And I read mine, and I could see some squirming in some of the seats. And then after they got around the room, they go back to, the chairman says, okay, now it's time for questions. So he goes back to the Bayer lobbyist so that he could counter what I had said. And one of the comments he made was, well, the next thing you know, they're going to try and accuse glyphosate for being the cause for obesity in our country. And I immediately says, I would like to address that gentleman's comments, please. And the chair said, you just wait your turn. Oh, okay. And I did. And he gave me the opportunity. When the Bayer lobbyist and the Bayer employee got finished speaking, he pointed at me and he says, what do you want to say? I says, well, the gentleman doesn't know how prophetic he was. I said, it's very soundly documented in this independent scientific literature that glyphosate has a very, very adverse effect on the microbiome of the soil and the gut. And I said, specifically in the gut, the lactobacillus, the enterococcus faecalis, and the bifidobacteria are very sensitive to glyphosate, and they're nearly wiped out completely with the smallest amount being present. And I said, there's an emerging amount of science that shows when those beneficials are absent from the gut, obesity is very, very common. And the look on that guy's face was like, I'm not going to open my mouth again, because he just stuck both my feet in it. And he didn't say nothing the rest of the time. The chairman of the committee meeting, he says to me, he says, who are you? And I repeated how I'd introduced myself. My name is Howard Vlieger. I'm a Christian constitutional conservative. I'm a regenerative farmer and food producer, and I'm the primary coordinator of a scientific study that was published in 2013 that documented the ill effects of GMO corn and soy to pigs for their lifetime as a meat animal. And he says, what's your degree? I says, I'm working on that yet. Well, what's your education? What's your degree? I says, I'm still working on it. And of course, that is the typical put down. I wanted to say, when he said, what's your degree? Dr. Huber told me, he says, well, you don't have to be a rotten egg to identify one, but I didn't say that. I sent that gentleman an email when I got home that night, and I sent him the scientific study that I coordinated, along with the plain English translation. I says, you may want this if you're not accustomed to reading science. Then I sent him the white paper that I had written on glyphosate that's been published in 3, 4, 5 different locations. And I sent him Dr. Nancy Swanson's paper on the correlation between the subsequent increased use of GMOs, glyphosate, and the subsequent deterioration of health in our country, which that was published back in 2014, and all it's done is getting worse since then. So Kathleen's question about the pigs, the pig study that we did was a follow-up to what I was calling circumstantial coincidental evidence that when GMOs were in the feed supply, there were digestive and reproductive issues. When you took it away, the problem went away. And I shared that with Dr. Lane Ingham in 2003 when I took her classes the first time. And she says, no, Howard, the proper term for that is anecdotal. Now do a study. Well, as time progressed and I was able to connect with the right scientists, Dr. Judy Carmen from Australia was the lead scientist on that study. And we took pigs right off their mama when they were weaned. We split them into two groups. They were evenly divided for weight and sex. And then we drew a number out of the hat as far as who gets to be fed what diet. It was a double-blind study. The only person that knew who was fed what was the people that filled the feeder. And Dr. Arpad Pustai is one of the many amazing mentors I've been blessed to work with over the years. I started working with him in 2003. And I sent him the protocol for the study after we had finished it. He said, you need to weigh these pigs every week. And I said, well, we're going to weigh them in the nursery. We'll weigh them out of the nursery and we'll weigh them when we're done. He said, no, you need to weigh these pigs every week. Otherwise, you won't know if they quit growing. I said, well, we can see that. He said, no, you will weigh these pigs every week. And I said, that's going to take a lot of work. He says, I don't care. So we did it. When they were little, we picked them up. We put them on the scale. We wrote down their number, wrote down their weight every week. When they got too big to pick up, we made a simple maze and they went through the little maze and they got on the scale. We wrote down their number. They wrote down their weight. Well, the people that weighed the pigs didn't know who was fed what. It was pen 1, 2, 3, and 4. Pen 1 and 2 would go through the simple maze very easily. And it was kind of like playtime. We get out of our normal surroundings and we run around and we kick up our heels and we get on this little jiggly thing and then they let us go and we get to run around and kick up our heels until they lock us up again. The pigs in pen 3 and 4 couldn't go through this simple maze. And pigs are very much creatures of habit, but they never did figure it out. As soon as they got in confined quarters, they started fighting and biting and picking on one another. Well, guess which bunch was fed the GMO feed? The ones that couldn't figure out this simple task and started fighting and biting and picking on one another. When they're back in their normal surroundings, they're irritable.
Wow.
The editor of the journal wouldn't allow us to publish that or even mention it because we didn't anticipate it. So we didn't have the protocols established to monitor it properly. But I mean, he wouldn't even let us bring it up, which I thought was a crock. The statistical findings of the study were twofold. There was a 260% increase likelihood of severe inflammation in the stomachs of the pigs that ate the GMO feed. 400% for the males, 220% for the females. The weight of the utera of the GM-fed females was 25% abnormally heavy compared to the average utera weight of the non-GM fed. We didn't have the money to do the histological analysis on the stomachs or the utera, but going into it, we knew there was a digestive problem and we knew there was a reproductive problem based on the anecdotal information that had been accumulated from the farming customers we were privileged to work with throughout the Midwest. When Dr. Carmen figured up the statistics after we had done the necropsies, she was staying at my mom's house and my brother was there and he had just gone upstairs to go to bed for the night. And the next thing he hears, there's somebody jumping up and down in the kitchen yelling, yes, 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 yes. And he come downstairs and what's going on? And Judy run up to him and he's a genius. He's a genius. And what are you talking about? Your brother's a bloody genius. Because when she saw the statistics on the stomachs, it was very stark. There was no gray area. It was, yes, 260% increased likelihood of severe inflammation across the board.
Wow.
And, but going back to the behavior thing, which they wouldn't let us mention, I asked this question. In 1996, before 85% of the processed foods in the grocery store had ingredients from GMO crops, how many people were on mood-altering medications such as SSRIs for ADD, ADHD, and the like, compared to what it is today when 85% of the processed foods in the grocery store do contain ingredients from GMO crops? How many people are on mood-altering medications? And
Exactly.
we've seen additional clinical and anecdotal information to show that glyphosate residues in the feed supply for animals will cause equal severe swings in the moods of the animals.
This story is what got me, Howard. When I first heard you speak, it was the pig story. And it was largely the behavioral end. When you said that the pigs that I have, when I put them on the feed that has glyphosate in it, they misbehave, can't get along, bite each other's tails, can't figure things out, won't listen to directions. And I said to myself, whoa, we're changing what's in our pantry, because that's what I live every day with my boys. And sure enough, once we switched, they were a lot easier to raise. So I will say to all those moms out there is something to these behavioral issues. And also, I guess we can post it on the website afterward, the photographs of the stomachs of these pigs, the difference between the ones who were fed feed that had glyphosate in it versus the feed that was clean is night and day. It's sad, really, when you see the intestines and the stomachs of the pigs that were fed the feed with the glyphosate. They are bright red. They're not like the healthier pigs had like a light pink stomach lining, and the unhealthy pigs had like a bright red, stomach lining. It looks as though they suffered, and there was like a kind of pus in it too. It was just night and day, the two pictures. If you could see the study, maybe we could post it. But
and to clarify, it was the GMO, not the glyphosate, because at that point in time, glyphosate residue in the feed wasn't on the radar. So we didn't test for glyphosate residue in the feed. It was the GMO and the subsequent foreign protein. That was what Dr. Pustai helped me understand. Dr. Pustai was the first scientist in the world to do a true scientific study on a GMO crop and measure the effect that it had on mammals. He did the BT potato, and BT is Bacillus thuringiensis, which the BT in the gut causes it to explode. Bacillus thuringiensis is a natural occurring soil bacterium that organic farmers could actually spray on their crop to stop a corn borer infestation. The genetically engineered version is similar but vastly different, but it causes the gut to explode in that insect.
In the GM food.
In the BT.
In the BT, yeah, but
right.
That's what's, yeah.
But Dr. Pustai went on to help me understand. He had the original potato and the BT potato, and he fed the BT to a group of rats, and it had no effect. It did not have an adverse effect. The BT wasn't the problem. The problem, as he explained to me, is the process of making this genetically engineered plant. He said, you can have two potatoes that are identical. You pull a gene out of this potato and you insert it into this potato, and it's already there. So you're not putting anything foreign in. It's just that process of the insertion man playing God, that disrupts the genetic balance in that plant. It displaces and disrupts and causes the development of a foreign protein. That foreign protein, when it enters the digestive tract, challenges the immune system, puts it on full alert, and weakens it.
Well, can
And
you
it's
talk about like Ib Peterson? Because didn't your friend Ib
well, and
afterwards
that's a
took
follow.
it a
Yeah,
step?
I
Yeah.
can do that also, but that was glyphosate related. You know, there's you wouldn't have the glyphosate residue issues as widespread as we do if we didn't have crops that are genetically engineered to tolerate the application of glyphosate.
Yeah.
And if for people that don't know, the glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup and many other generic forms of herbicide that they're non-selective. They're basically designed to kill any green plant they touch, with a few exceptions. But as a whole, it's non-selective. But your reference to the pigs in my friend in Denmark, he switched off of the GMO soybean meal. I spoke at the Acres USA conference in 2008, and I shared the anecdotal information that led us to do the study on the pigs. And I already knew the results of the study, but I couldn't share it because it wasn't published yet. Well, Ib from Denmark got a copy of my presentation, and next thing I know, I'm communicating with a man in Denmark that raises pigs. And he said, well, would it pay me to buy non-GMO soybean meal? And I, without hesitation, said, absolutely. And he says, well, it's going to cost 220 kroner a ton more, which meant absolutely nothing to me because I didn't know the exchange rate on kroner versus dollar. And I said, it's worth it. Are you sure? I says, yeah, and I don't know what a kroner is, but it's worth it. Well, he believed me, so he switched. And his death loss in his sows went away, his scours problems in his sows and his pigs went away, and his productivity increased. But he was still having some issues. Well, that was in the early days of understanding the glyphosate residue as a result of the pre-harvest desiccation use in small grain. Raised oats or wheat or barley or any of those small grains, and then they're in a climate that's a short growing season, gets cool too quick, doesn't get enough heat to fully mature. Oh, well, guess what? You can go out and it's not ready to harvest. Instead of mechanically putting it in a windrow, letting drying it out, being susceptible to the weather, you can go out and spray it with Roundup or a generic glyphosate, kill the small grain and also any weeds that may be there. And now 5 to 8 days later, you come in and you harvest it with the combine, take it standing. Life is good, supposedly. Well, the one little problem, glyphosate accumulates in the meristematic tissue of the plant. That's the root tips and the buds. So it's going, the bud is the grain. You're putting glyphosate directly in the food supply with that pre-harvest desiccation. The moisture has to be 15% or less on oats, or 13% or less on oats, 15 on wheat, but it varies by crop. But you can go out when it's 18, 20%, spray it with Roundup. 5 to 8 days later, it dries down. Now you can come in and harvest it. Life is supposedly good, with the exception of the glyphosate residue going into the feed supply and the food supply. Most of our so-called leaky gut and or gluten intolerance issues in our country, 90+% of them are connected to glyphosate. And we have science to verify a very strong hypothesis for that. But back to Ib and his pigs, he was getting pigs that were born with deformities. Well, he was buying soybean meal that was imported, and it was non-GMO now instead of Roundup Ready. And he bought all of his other feed for his hogs locally, and it was small grain that was being pre-harvest desiccated with Roundup. Well, he bought a year's supply at a time so he could test a composite sample of that grain that went into the feed bin, and he had 3 years of data of testing it. He had from 0.25 to 1.33 to 2.27 parts per million of glyphosate documented in either the grain and or the bedding he was using. He was getting these pigs born with birth defects. Some were born alive, many were born dead, some were born alive and died shortly. He put them in the freezer. He says, what do we do? Well, I tried to get a hold of Dr. Carrasco. Then Dr. Monica Kruger came on the scene, and she, in my opinion, woke up the world to the damaging effects of glyphosate residue in the feed supply with the research that she did in Leipzig University. She was on the other side of the wall. So nobody from the corporate world could influence the research she was doing. She got to do the real research and prove the damaging effects of glyphosate. Ib sent all these pigs to her, and she dissected them and examined the heart, the liver, the lung, the muscle, the brain. I think that's all of the body parts. I can send you the study on it.
I would love it.
And she found an accumulated level of glyphosate in all of these body parts.
Wow. Yep.
It was 0.25, 1.13, and 2.27 were the levels of ingested, whether it be from feed and or bedding. It was as high as 80 in some of the organs. And of course, we're told by the company that got the EPA registration in the first place that it doesn't bioaccumulate. Wrong.
And how many people eat organ meat? They ask me all the time, hey, what do you think about organ meat? I'm like, I'd never eat organ meat.
Well, organ
Like
meat's
it's
very,
all-
very good for you as long as it comes from an animal that's got.
Yeah.
Clean
But
feed.
the muscle, Lori, also had it. So it doesn't matter if it was from the organs
Right.
or from the muscle of the pig. It was present. So
Wow.
yeah, it's not good.
Yeah. Well, that's really worrisome. I mean, all of that, it just eating GMOs or eating food that has glyphosate on it comes with risks. And
But it's the amount, Kathleen, too, of the families that really just don't know because they just don't know.
It's in everything out
It
there.
is.
If you're not eating organic, you're eating it, most likely. And
Well,
that's
regrettably, because of the bastardization of the organic standards by USDA,
right.
there's more glyphosate residue in organic than there should be. It's vastly better than the mainstream is, but it's still there because of the ubiquitous nature of it in the environment and the fact that USDA approved the use of manure from a CAFO, confined animal feeding operation, which is a commodity production that's feeding Roundup Ready everything to their animals. Well, guess what? The glyphosate and AMPA ends up in the manure. So now USDA, in their infinite wisdom / stupidity, comes out and says, you can put this glyphosate contaminated manure on the certified organic land and everything is hunky-dory.
Yeah. It's
Oh my
really
gosh.
better to know your farmer.
So, I have a question. Maybe it's just a comment. Maybe neither one of you know or Howard. So for people who do eat meat or wheat bread, and someone typically eats organic, but then you're out at a restaurant and they obviously always come with the fattening loaves of bread. I always decline it. But when they're putting that on the table, and let's say somebody's got exposure to it once a week or twice a month, do you think that that's equally, I mean, I know what I believe, but do you feel that that is equally as damaging? And then I have an email question that someone is asking, on mRNA technology, we can get your opinion, your comment on that as well.
That's a loaded question on the bread, but the safest thing I have found is if you don't know where it's coming from and the waitress can't answer you, which it's not her fault because she's not sourcing it. Always remember that. If you don't know where it's from, don't eat it.
That's how I am. I mean,
that's easy.
Yeah. I don't think sometimes my family likes it, but I'm okay sitting at a restaurant without any water unless they have bottled water. But if I don't know, if they don't have the answers for me, I'm sitting at the table with an empty nothing, no plate in front of me. So what is your comment, your opinion on the mRNA technology now, the vaccines? I know in Utah, which I was very saddened to hear on the labeling here in Utah. I feel it was a battle for the Utahns here, but what are your feelings on that? I mean, I know where I think it's going, but what do you believe where it's going now?
I don't know where it's going, but I know what it is. It's completely untested. And anybody that agrees to it is part of the treatment group rather than the control. And, you know, when somebody asks me a question like that, I think of the meme that shows the two little mice talking, that one asks the other what he thinks of the mRNA, and the other one responds, I don't know, I'm going to wait until the human trials are over.
Yeah, I love that one. It's just like now they're getting hit from both ends because most families will go into restaurants because and Kathleen and I talked about, like, I feel like our socializing has been, there's like limited restaurants we can eat. The whole COVID thing came out. Like, even as couples, there's like, we're so limited in what we can do. But these families now that go out to eat at is their normal restaurant, not going to say Denny's, but maybe a scale up. But now they're getting hit with glyphosate foods. They don't know where the meat's coming from with the mRNA technology. We don't know where it's going. We don't even know what's going to be going on with immune systems 2-3 years from now. And that's a little bit concerning and frightening to me at the same time for families. And it's controversial because when you talk about it, people will say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. No, I'm a realist. I know what these poisons are doing. I know what glyphosate's doing. I know what mRNA technology is doing. But I mean, families are bombarded as is, but.
Can you read that?
It's flipped because your camera's not mirrored. What's it say?
Oh. Conspiracy theorist, someone who questions the statements of known liars.
Oh, I like that.
I have that pinned up right in my workstation on the bottom of Albert Einstein and his comment, the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything.
Agreed. Got to stand up.
But it's all about education and, doing our best to deliver the message in a kind way to hopefully raise the awareness. I've been so blessed to become friends and associate and be mentored by so many. Dr. Perro's book, for example, What's Making Our Children Sick. One of my favorite chapters in the book is the one where I can't remember if it's a little boy or a little girl. The family's got 2 kids, father, mother, 2 children. One of the children is a patient close to being on the spectrum. Of course, the first thing Dr. Perro recommends is changing the diet to organic, as nutrient dense as possible food. Mother decides she's not going to make 2 sets of meals for the families. Everybody's going on it. Father has 25% kidney function, has to go to the doctor every 6 months. She switched the diet right after his 6-month checkup. 6 months later, he goes back. His kidney function now is 75%. The doctor's like, what did you do? What did you do? He says, I didn't do anything different. Well, you must have. Something's changed. And he says, well, the only thing I can think of that's different, my wife started using only organic food for feeding our family. The doctor says, well, that can't make any difference. That individual's letting his education stand in the way of his learning.
Yes. Agreed.
So,
and is that the...
There you go. There's one of the pigs.
Wow. Oh,
That's the Christmas pig.
Those poor babies.
That one was born alive on Christmas Day.
well, they should probably just have that as a poster on the restaurants when they're walking into the nasty restaurants.
He was born without front legs. That pig lived about an hour.
It's heartbreaking.
Howard, if to the farmers that are listening, to the gardeners that are listening, if they're looking at a place to start, what is the reason that you can give based on all of your decades of experience? What would you like to tell the farmers and the gardeners, but mostly the farmers out here that are in Utah that are kind of stuck in the wickedness of chemicals?
There's an alternative. And is it going to be instantaneous? Probably not. Is it going to be easy? Probably not. Is it going to be better for your land? Better for the environment around you? Better for your health? Better for your family's health? Better for your animals' health? Absolutely. And I did a podcast with a lady in Nebraska the other day, well, a couple months ago now, I guess it was. And she's very strong in her faith. And she said from a spiritual standpoint, can you do things different than what you're doing? And I said, no, I can't. Because, everybody's a sinner. None of us are perfect. We all need forgiveness. Thankfully, we have that gift thanks to Jesus' ultimate sacrifice. But I said, for me to go back to farming or go to, I never used GMOs or glyphosate other than a research setting on our farm. But for me to use it today would be like knowingly breaking the 10 commandments every chance I could. Because how can I do that? The family members, the young children, one of the first instances, which I didn't share with you, my 8th grade math teacher calls me up way back when, and before we had certification about the cleanliness of our soils and our crops, where we did chemical residue testing and there was none to be found. And he was getting organic pork for his son, and his son had a condition that was, this long, the word. And 2 weeks, when he first called me up, I thought, yeah, he still hasn't forgot about what I did in math class in 8th grade one day. And he said, no, we're having problems. When he calls me up 2 weeks after he got the pork home from the locker, he bought a half a hog from us. And he's in tears on the other end of the phone, thanking me not only for what it has done for his son, but his wife had been told by the doctor 2.5 years previous to never eat pork again because of her ulcers. She could eat the pork that came from our farm. And a light back in this dark corner starts to flicker a little bit. And maybe there's something to this on what we're doing. I saw the improvement in our livestock health, the need for veterinary medicine went away as soon as we changed the soil and improved the quality of what we were growing. So the inputs went down, it didn't go up. And, I don't try to get the biggest yield in the neighborhood. There's been years when I had the biggest yield in the neighborhood when it didn't rain. But I'm focusing on what's good for the soil. That's my biggest asset as a farmer. That is my biggest asset is the soil.
Mhm.
I better know how to handle it right.
Mhm.
And if you don't know, pick up Gabe Brown's book and start reading, because
I love it.
it's going to pay you return on investments in ways you can't begin to imagine. And when you get the feedback from the family that couldn't find anything that the kid could tolerate, well, that kind of gets you there.
It feels, it was the same in my house when I heard your talk, Howard, and we switched the way we were feeding our family. It was the same. We stopped going to the pediatrician, like no more pediatrician. She said she missed us because we'd been such regulars. Seriously, we became good friends because I saw her all the time, and she was like, I really miss seeing you guys. And I said, well, sorry, we're better. We're better. We don't need to see you anymore. That's just how it is. And the thing with the farmers is the mentality has been set so much that it's about yield, it's about yield, it's about yield. And they'll buy whatever chemical or whatever fertilizer they're told to buy to get the yield. They've been taught that that's what they should do. And I think that we need to try to refocus everyone on soil health and biological health. We need to change that mindset, because I know that farmers who are farming regeneratively are making a good living, and they're producing healthier food, and they have healthier animals, and they enjoy healthier soil life on their farms. When it rains, they don't have to see half their farm, get caught in the runoff and all their topsoil go away. It's just about education and spreading the word. Do you find that since you started, there
And
is?
Kathleen, just so that you know, we have a caller on hold. I don't know if
Oh,
we want to
okay.
just take this question.
I'll ask quickly.
Make sure you
Okay.
post the Understanding Ag's website also, because they have a lot of free webinar information that people can participate in
Yeah,
that teaches the basics.
right. There's a lot just on YouTube.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and take the call then, Lori, and let's see what the.
Okay. Hey, Leighton, do you want to bring the caller in?
Yep, let me bring him right on in.
Howard, this was awesome.
Hey, Steve. Hey, you are live with the Wellness Crusaders. What question do you have for them today?
Wow, excellent. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed the show a lot. I've learned a lot about soil, and you guys moved on to the pigs, and I absolutely love the comment that Einstein made. It really makes sense. How's everybody doing today?
Well,
We're all good.
thanks.
Thankful to be up and around.
Okay, good. Me too. I have a question relative to when you were talking about the soil earlier. Many of us believe that God said every 7 years, let the soil rest and rejuvenate, and then in the long run, if you do that, you'll have more crops than if you had harvested all 7 years. How do you find that to be true today? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it if the soil is given the opportunity to essentially regenerate for that 1 year off.
In an environment where tillage is implemented for crop production, which was the case before the regenerative understandings came to be more common, that 1 year out of 7 rest was much more necessary. And with the understanding that we have now of having a plant there to feed the microbiome of the soil. Because if you have nothing growing there, you're not feeding the microorganisms. There's no mechanism there to nurture them. It's like you not eating. It's like you not eating food for a year. So that, you might not feel the best if you attempted that. And
Right.
with the regenerative approach, if you look at the prairies, the way it was, and this example Brown always gives, the bison and the elk and the deer and all of the wildlife, they grazed in the prairie, and the diversity of species, they have done counts in some of this native prairie, and there's over 140 different plant species present. So then that gives you that very broad mixture of the different foods that you're putting into the soil for the nurturing of that microbial population. And then as the elk and the deer and the bison, they would be hunted by the wolves, so they would move them, and the wolves and the other predators would take out the weakest species, but then that kept moving them and moving them. Well, that concept is mimicked in the managed grazing systems that are utilized. And then, of course, when they eat something, they poop, and then that's remineralization of the soil. I get the concept of doing that in the Old Testament times, but I don't believe that that's necessary in a regenerative system with the understanding of what we now know. And there's a lot of science to back up this thing. The Dr. James White has done the rhizophagy work, and the lack of the presence of the beneficial plant growing there, and the subsequent decrease in the microbial population, and the most beneficial efficiency from that ground. And again, you take the full regenerative approach with the diverse species and the no tillage and integration of livestock, and you look at Dr. Stephen Van Vliet's work, and he's looked at this phytonutrient content down to, he talks about things you've never heard about.
Yeah.
When I heard his talk in Texas the first time, however many years ago, I couldn't sit still because he was talking about phytonutrients that were mostly foreign to me. I recognized some of the names, but then he showed how they were integral, and the lack of it showed a diabetes spike. And the lack of this one was connected to another health issue in the population. So the soil is an amazing creation for us to be caretakers of. And I am totally of the mindset that you don't want to leave it sit every 7 years, because if you do, something's going to grow there. You're better off to manage it with beneficial species than to just let come whatever comes, because the soil's going to cover itself with something. If that makes sense.
You guys are speaking an absolute foreign language to me anyway, for the most part. But it's very interesting to hear. I've learned a lot. I really appreciate you guys doing this show, and kudos to you guys. So thank you very much for answering my question.
Thank you.
Thank you for your call, and I want you to know, as a student of the soil, I have absolutely no problem admitting the more I know I don't know. And that makes every day an amazing opportunity to learn more about what the good Lord's given us to be caretakers.
Thank you for saying that.
Just about every way of life. So, okay, well, thank you guys. I'll hang up and let you guys wrap it up.
All right, we've got a few minutes left. Howard, I don't even want to let this conversation going. I can't even, it's just been amazing. I mean, just having the two of you on this call is just amazing. So Kathleen, how do you want to wrap this up?
I don't know. I agree with you, Lori. I'm so grateful to Howard for everything that he's taught me and my family and set me on this journey so I could learn about these things. And it's inspirational. Thank you for everything you do all the time for other people, Howard.
Yeah. And I would love your paper, Howard.
Or yeah, the paper. I put it up on our chat. So yeah, everyone please look up The Pig Study by Howard Vlieger. And Howard, what's the best way they can find that study?
GMOJudyCarmen.org is the website.
CARMAN, is that right?
Yes.
And also, how do they find more about, I mean, I know I buy your chicken and your turkey, but how do our listeners get a hold of you? What's your website? How do they buy your meat?
We don't have a website.
Okay.
Which I should have, but it's strictly word of mouth.
Okay.
What's your
and right now we're in a growth spurt and we're challenged to keep up. We're gaining on supply again, but it's for whatever reason we've had a pretty significant uptick, and surprisingly a lot of it local, which is less headaches to manage because UPS and FedEx have not been our friend all the time. So they're just overtaxed, I guess.
Right.
But,
they can
yeah.
always send us an email. Anyone like wanting to get a hold of Howard, if you're really wanting to get some of his meat, his dairy, info@thewellnesscrusaders.com, and we will make sure that your information gets over to Howard. Howard, one final comment before we say goodbye for the evening.
Every challenge is an opportunity. And I recognize the fact that when the good Lord challenges us, it's a growing opportunity and experience. And I'll also quickly admit that there's days that, okay, I realize it's a character building experience. Just how much of a character do you really think I need to be? But follow his lead. He won't lead you astray. It's, it's a privilege to share information with others. For me, I have to pay it forward because I have been so richly blessed by all the mentors that I work with. I cannot not do it. So, and
I love it.
Whether it's one at a time or a group, whatever the case may be, it's, we're all missionaries to a degree. So.
I love it. And one final word for families listening. Why should they eat the food that is not poisoned? How would you like to leave that?
They don't know how the good life can get, because if the brain fog, the bloating, the indigestion, the discomfort, the sore joints, it's so much. One of my mentors, his name is Verlin, he taught me many years ago, the more you get your system cleaned out, the more sensitive you're going to be. And I took that as susceptible for a while. And then I realized he was right. I can take a bite of something that I think is okay, and in less than 2 minutes, I can tell you I shouldn't have eaten it if I shouldn't have eaten it. whether or not everybody gets to that point of sensitivity or not will be determined by their efforts to get there. But it's so exciting. I mean, every day we get to learn more and learn more and learn more and learn more. There's when Dr. Ingham was on our farm in 2004, I took her classes in 2003. She came out in 2004. And I used to say, the more I learn, the dumber I feel. And then my friend in Mitchell County, Georgia told me, the more I know I don't know. Well, that sounds a whole lot better. But we're in the field and we looked, and I said, the more I learn, the dumber I feel. And she says, you know why that is, don't you? I says, well, my definition of it is the good Lord's given us such an amazing creation to be caretakers of. When we understand a fraction of it, we see how much more there is to discover. It's like looking through a crack. You're in a dark room and there's a light in the crack of the door, and the closer you get to the crack, the bigger and bigger and bigger the view gets. And I says, if you ever open the door, then the view is immense. And we, in our limited understanding compared to his infinite wisdom, we've got so much to learn as time goes on. She says, well, I wouldn't disagree with anything you said, but my explanation is a lot shorter than yours is. And I says, okay, what's that? She said, he doesn't want us to be bored.
I love that. I love that. So thank you both. Howard, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. It's always a joy and pleasure to see you and chat with you. Any final comment, Kathleen? No? I think we lost Kathleen's voice there. All right. Well, that's it. That is
Sorry,
a wrap.
I was muted. I was
Oh.
muted. I just want to say I can't top what Howard said.
Yeah. So we'll leave it at that. So thank you. Stay tuned for next week while we have another exciting episode of the Wellness Crusaders. I'm going to end the session, and Howard, we will see you as soon as we end that, so don't go anywhere. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.